advisor for the Israeli Cyber Directorate. Yes. First time that I got it right. And now an expert on AI and policy.
So there's a lot of things in your fascinating presentation, but there is something I always wanted to ask a First Amendment scholar, which is related to the subject, and you said you're a First Amendment scholar. So just to make sure that I ground it in this conversation. So in my view, in the socio-technical attempt of law and policy to tame technology, we have this tool set, which is based on risk management and understanding what technology does. And one of the major places where this is met the law in a formal general purpose way is cybersecurity, information security. And the way I view the transition from cybersecurity to data protection accountability, and I may not go into a discussion about accountability because you've thought about it too much, too dangerous in this room with all these people. But the transition between information security risk management and data protection risk management through accountability means we have a social layer, right? We want to protect whatever things from impact, harms, and again, using these words. And so, when we, because everyone is talking AI, and policymakers are talking AI, and legislators are talking at the AI, and they're looking at the, let's say, compliance practitioners, and they're passing the ball to them to promote. Okay? So our tool set has risk management, accountability, compliance, and in the US context, I think the most advanced version would be this California law. It's also, I think, more advanced also in the GDPR context in the sense that, I'll just say this for everyone else that may not be aware, this is a place where you see actual data protection principles applied to concrete or more concrete situations of harms to privacy with regard to children. So the law is a lot more restrictive than we have in the more general, let's have a nice document that nobody reads and say notice and choice. So we have a, okay. And so when we start to do data protection, AI compliance, we look back and we have cybersecurity risk management, we have data protection accountability, as transposed in a very, I think, interesting case in the Child Protection Code of Conduct. And then, this First Amendment case, which basically says, so I wonder, I mean, where we should go. I mean, perhaps from a political economy point of view, one would think we need to frame the discussion such that the people funding elect choice will not see this as a risk. But from a techno-social compliance point of view, I mean, I was amazed by the case. Because it says US policy will not enable these types of more accountability models. That's the way I read it anyhow, but again, so, yeah.
I mean, I agree with you. My hope is that, first of all, there are ways to maybe draft around the decision. And I will say that I think one of the things, I think it's a bad decision. I hope it will be overturned. I also think that there are probably ways to draft around it. But one of the components of the California Act that clearly bothered the judges, and this goes to cybersecurity, was the sort of risk management approach of having impact statements, doing impact statements, bothered them because for First Amendment law, you need a nexus, right, between the problem you're trying to solve and the approach you're trying to take, and they didn't see it. And they said, if what you're trying to do is protect children, we don't really see what a lot of paperwork about risk management does to protect children. And so I thought that, first of all, that's not necessarily wrong, right? Like we all know there is a gap there. So anyway, I think there's creative thinking even with this law to work around it, but I agree, it's a huge stumbling block.
Maybe each of you just introduce yourself when you ask the question. So,
Hi, I'm Letty, computer science from Boston University.
Good to see you.
Yeah, nice. Let's see you. Good surprise. So a couple of comments, there are questions language, but so first just to say that you talked about terminology being, like this word. So a lot of these words actually do have concrete mathematical meaning that I'm sure you know computer science, and most of them context specific and different meaning, different context. But and that's maybe even a bigger hurdle because one side we use the same language but we mean different things, and so it's one thing to think about. And then like the 3 points I wanted to say about regulation, which I think are crucial for good regulation, but I'm not sure I saw them explicitly stated, but you said maybe I missed it. So one thing I think is it's crucial to regulate the responsibility and liability in the AI pipeline. Because we know AI has a big pipeline and it's not clear who is responsible for what. So if there is a fundamental LLM that is later used by some prompt engineering to their product, and this product later creates a picture which is a clear-cut copyright infringement, then who is liable? Is it the first step, the second step, and how to adjudicate this? I think it's crucial. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm not aware of any legal basis for adjudicating this without additional regulation or law. So maybe that's one thing where regulation can help. And people will know what they're bound on. Another thing that I think is crucial for effective regulation is the requirement for ex ante analysis and provisions, as opposed to ex post assignment of liability in case of harm occurs. So that's what we do in computer science. That's we're trying to teach our students. But I think we've been we had this discussion a year ago. But yeah, it's important to require companies and software providers to provide ex ante analysis and guarantees, and then be liable if these guarantees are not, even if there is no damage, just the fact that it's not, so the sacrifice should be valid. Right? I think it's important. And the third point regarding the information integrity, I think again that's something. So, as far as I can see, I'm an academic, but the technology exists today, and there's very little effort to have guaranteed to build devices that give you guarantees about provenance. For instance, it's not so hard to put into every cell phone, every smartphone, a gadget that will sign, like when you press 5 times, or even without pressing 5 times, will sign the picture that it's taken together with its date, the location, some other parameters that you can sensors, and signs it on the phone in a way that it's unforgeable, and later can be verified that this was taken by whatever Google Pixel. The technology is so powerful. Technology really exists. It just needs to be deployed, and that's maybe a place where regulation can help, because as we know, there is no much financial incentives for companies to do it. That's the sale, but we know it's important. I've had very frustrating days in the early October trying to prove to people across the ocean that I'm not lying, that I'm not making things up. And time is the essence of such a thing for the company. So yeah. Okay.
Well, I'll just respond to a few of those. And Ron, I mean, your work on sort of burden of proof has been very influential for me, and sort of like it's we do expect this in cyber, right, and in crypto that there's a sort of proof of work ex ante. The pushback to that I think that we've heard is that for certain kinds of high risk or critical functions, yes, you can do that, but also there are always going to be use limitations, and you can sort of make this, you can have that burden of proof with respect to certain expected downstream uses, but once it's taken out of that context, then you shouldn't be held responsible for that. So that's the whole life cycle thing. On the provenance point, right, so that's the whole value chain has to be bought. I think two things has to be bought into it, right? The device manufacturers have to want to use the standard, and I think there is a role for regulation there. I worry about kind of a world in which we have a lot of false negatives, so that 70% or 80% or some high number of entities are authenticating their content, but some aren't, and so that if you anything that doesn't have an authentication or metadata or whatever the technology is presumed to be fake or not, authentic, and that's problematic. And then the last thing on the on your point about liability and who in the chain, I'm not sure if that's regulation as much as it is. I mean, I live in a common law place as much as it is the development of law, and so one question we're already facing. Everyone probably knows Section 230, and there's this question of whether Section 230 will provide immunity for ChatGPT when it spits out harmful content. And so, and that really goes to the question, your prompt engineering example, who's responsible for that content? Is it OpenAI? Is it the prompt generation? And I think we'll find that out in case law about 230, and we'll probably answer those questions in that way.
Shelley.
Hi, I'm Shelley Passner. I'm here a PhD candidate in law. First, well, the question for Benny. Well, that's a segue. You said that all these companies are using data illegally, and yes, I'm talking to you. No. And so maybe some people in the room would like to comment. They have other opinion. I know there's a lawsuit just last week that they was filed with in New York, right? So I'm not sure that's clear. So it's interesting to know what other people here think. But regarding the main event, I'm becoming very skeptical about the idea of regulation as such. And here, and you said, what's a stack load of paper have to do with child protection? And how and especially when you think about the finance world, right? So we know that 2008, now we discovered that Hamas have generative ideas of how to make profit. America doesn't have a very good track record in regulation. So why is that an answer? Is this the answer? Can they have other answers? Are there any loopholes? Obviously, it's a mesh. Nothing is there. But how easily, even now, it can be overturned? And maybe what's your take about a different one like OpenAI and the fiasco that was like at the beginning of the month, and they have a different structure, a different governance, corporate governance structure, and they did try to do something against it, it didn't fail. So maybe that's sort of answer.
What's the governance structure, like a nonprofit?
Like a nonprofit with different angles. Maybe it's an experiment. It's an interesting experiment to read about that, how they structured the company.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I share your regulation's very limited tool. But but it's also a tool to, and this is where sort of the accountability input side is it's a tool to sort of generate more tools that maybe can be used outside a regulatory context.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Oren and I work for the Freedom of Information Movement. I was wondering, you talk about the hegemony of several companies over the data. We all know that there are a few companies that hold a majority share or a large share of the international data, but I did wonder what you think about using public data that are owned by governments in order to be used to allow smaller companies to develop AI models, to validate or to train other AI, or even just to check on or to use as a validator for the use of other AI.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's necessary, and that's sort of one of the NAIR objectives. And I think in the Department of Commerce, where I sit, I learned that it's the biggest holder of data in the world. It has, it's the sources are the U.S. Census and the OSHA,
Yes.
but A lot of that data is not accessible, and it's not tagged properly, it's not managed by, so they're aware of that, and I think there's an aspiration that, you know, you shouldn't be surprised when there's a lot of crap out there, when like the good stuff is not accessible. So, great idea, yeah.
Hey, Ellen. So I was wondering a long time if there is, are policymakers considering developing, I mean, there's a lot of literature, mainly in the EU, dealing with data pooling and trusts and all that. So I was wondering, maybe to sidestep the First Amendment issues, are there any initiatives or development or thinking about somehow empowering the users to flag or converse directly with the regulator, passing data to them, or pooling the data, or somehow opt-in or opt-out for a version of oversight to some vetted academic researcher that can, I mean, somehow to streamline this communication between the end users and the overseeing regulator, or someone who is not a company that can do this analysis on behalf of users. I mean, there is any thinking about
an analysis of harms, or
yeah, risk assessments, or,
yeah,
or exploratory research, or whatever, some sort of I mean, getting the data directly from the end users, or some sort of mechanism that facilitates that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I am not aware of that. I mean, I see that out in the world,
yeah,
those ideas, but I'm not aware of that in government. But there was, and you see this in the executive order, there's a lot of attention on adverse incident reporting, and the OECD is doing something on this too. And I think that might be a way to kind of to deal with the life cycle issue and to do the monitoring of actually deployed systems and sort of collecting the data so that they go back. Because one of the empty terms or instructions that's thrown around, and this is including in the OMB procurement piece, is, you know, you shall monitor deployment, right? And like, what does that mean? How are you going to do that? And what incentive would you have to do it when you're a for-profit company? So I think, like, I'm sure there are elegant ways to make that sort of, to automate that, maybe a trust idea, and maybe sort of, you know, how do you also incentivize end users to make that worth their while to, you know, provide either their data or feedback. So that I know, the adverse incident reporting is on people's minds.
I was thinking about your comment earlier that we usually exclude military uses and defense from the regulation. And I'm thinking maybe as innovation, a lot of the times comes from military usage and development. Israel is an amazing example for that. Maybe this is also the key. I'm aware, for example, of the DARPA latest bid to create real accountable AI systems, both accountable from the user side and the system side. So maybe in a way, since, you know, from the defense perspective and maybe other perspectives which are, we usually regard them as excluded from regulation, but, you know, AI needs to perform 100%, and we do want people accountable for that. Maybe the cure will come from that. Answering your question earlier.
Well, I think if they were here, I mean, the Defense Department would say, we're way ahead on this. Like, we make autonomous weapons, and we've been thinking about this for a long time. We just don't want the suits we just want them out of our business. And so I'm not in a position to judge whether, like, how well that's working, but
we might be surprised.
Yeah, right.
Hopefully.
And there is also spillover often,
yeah, exactly,
between, right? If you think, I mean, as someone who comes from IP, we always think that the market is the best innovator, but most of the technology, the important technologies in the world, were developed by governments. Speaking of NASA,
yeah.
Right, Department
and
of
still
Defense.
worked out.
Right. I have a question regarding the Brussels effect, because you talked about the regulatory approach of the U.S. looking at China as like bigger the threat, right? And the question is to what extent, first of all, U.S. government is considering the prospects that they may face the same Brussels effect that they faced in the context of data protection and privacy, in the context of AI, if they don't move fast. And, also in this context, to ask, what do you recommend the Israeli companies? Israeli companies are mostly export-oriented. Should they consider at all what is happening in the U.S., or only focus on, the European is probably the going standard for the next couple of years?
Well, I can't imagine that the U.S. would do anything that is more regulatory than the EU. So, if you're compliant with the EU, I can't imagine there's going to be an instance where you're going to be not going to be compliant with the U.S., so that would be safe.
Yeah, but how about the other question of whether, the U.S. Let me be more precise. The question is if there is reluctance among American regulators from regulating AI, we'll end up with a race to the ceiling that is to go, that everyone will comply with the European standard, because that is the only standard.
No, I think they are worried about that, and I think it's funny because before I went into government and just sort of like dipped my toe into the way they talk about things, I was all like Brussels effect and the U.S. is way behind and it's all about Europe. And I see the way they look at it, they don't look at it that way at all. I mean, they sort of think like, whatever, they
but
first
why?
of all, because first of all, GDPR is not enforced well. Yes, there are sort of copycat, or I don't know, maybe you have a different view. That's the view that I hear. It's like, it's not, yes, companies are sort of complying with it, but there's not a lot of skin at risk. There's not a lot of skin in the game. And then the EU AI Act is just like it'll be years before it comes into force. And then it's all about what Annex 3 is and what exactly what gets covered and what risk level. And so the sense I get is that the Americans are not that worried about what Brussels is doing. At the same time, I think they viewed the executive order as like a big accomplishment because they got it out, they got it out before I think it was like the day before the big UK safety summit. That was intentional. And it was like, there is this kind of jostling. So they do like want to kind of grab some
whatever
of
it takes, right?
Yeah.
Any more questions? This is the time to meet the expert. Okay, on this happy note that we shouldn't care about the Brussels effect. Some optimism in the room. Thank you very much. This was
Thanks,
fascinating.
everybody. Thank you.